Hi, this is Brooke Holloway, and this is my observation video for task number 2 for continuous support for professional development. So basically what I did is I had a professional learning with a group of my coworkers, and we talked about diversity and inclusion in the classroom, as well as how it intertwines or relates with social and emotional learning. I decided to pick this topic just because I think inclusion is super important in the educational setting and for students to know how to work with other students. I think in a world where technology dominates, especially after COVID, it's easy to isolate ourselves and not build those social skills that students need. And as we progress in the world, our society is continuing to become more diverse, and students need to know how to adapt to an evolving world, as well as take in information and work with people and learn from other people's experiences, and that also helps them figure out who they are. So with this, my group for my video consisted of 4 different educators. One is a dance teacher. The second one is a PE teacher. And then I have a business teacher as well as a social studies teacher. And 2 of these people also teach at different schools. So I thought it was good to have them join and get their feedback about inclusion in the classroom and just hear different perspectives and allow the others to hear different perspectives as well. There was a complication in this video. So I had set up Zoom and I was able to screen record, but I did not realize that the audio was not recording. So unfortunately, I had to do a voiceover. But throughout this video, I will be talking, and then I'm going to try and get as many clips of all of us interacting as possible and give the general or the gist of what was talked about and what they talked about. So before we start into that video, I wanted to introduce this with a video about diversity and inclusion that will lead into our presentation.
Just coming from a diverse background, I think I hold a set of experiences that are unique, that are very much part of a larger narrative of people of color in America.
As a queer woman of color, I've never learned about anyone like me, and that from that kind of stemmed this confusion and feeling like I was really different.
For me, I grew up in the Caribbean. Being an Asian adopted kid in a black family growing up, people started to question my behavior. They were like, you don't act like an Asian kid. And I started to ask myself, what does that even mean?
Having a diverse group of peers around you is really important too, because you get the opportunity to talk about your identity and talk about the things that matter to you and your personal experiences, and get to share them with people who may have different, experiences than you do.
I think just learning from people about their customs and their religions and their ideas helps you kind of learn about yourself and learn about what's important to you and what's not important to you.
Getting exposed to ideas that you're not usually exposed to helps you develop more of a compassion towards your fellow humans. You can start interacting like humans.
I've learned more from the people I've met from the various backgrounds and cultures that they've grown up in, more so than just the regular stuff that comes out of your textbook.
You learn probably just as much from your peers and from the people that you're surrounded by that you do from your professors.
I bring a lot of perspectives to the table. I'm Afghan, I'm queer, I'm a woman. I've learned a lot of interesting women in history, women of color, queer people, figures
that have actually paved the way in a lot of ways that like you would have learned if, at more conservative schools?
I wouldn't have such a holistic understanding if I didn't have people around me who do come from a different set of backgrounds or unique sets of backgrounds.
It needs to happen. It's incredibly, incredibly important.
If we don't try to learn or we're not integrated into a diverse environment, into a diverse education, then we probably won't be able to survive, as much in this world or in this society.
So we are going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in the classroom, and then we are also going to talk about SEL and how they go together. So starting with the facts, according to Drexel University, in 2014, U.S. public schools hit a minority-majority milestone with Latino, African American, and Asian students, having surpassed the number of white students. The U.S. Census predicts that in 2044, that over half of the nation's population will be people of color. So when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about color. This also includes religion, economic status, sexual orientation, gender identity, language background, and more. So now more than ever, teachers need to incorporate culturally responsive instruction into classrooms. So talking about the benefit and focus of an inclusive classroom environment, the Drexel University states that this creates a greater multicultural awareness and helps students with different backgrounds and needs succeed. But it also encourages acceptance and helps prepare students to thrive in an exponentially diverse world. Our world is evolving quickly, and as educators, we need to prepare students to be able to adapt to a world that is constantly evolving. So talking a little bit about social and emotional learning, I know that as educators, we already know about SEL, but there are 5 components. So number 1 is self-management. So students will be able to manage emotions and behaviors to achieve one's goal. The second one is self-awareness. So this is students recognizing one's emotions and values, as well as strengths and challenges. I love this picture just because it's a kitten looking in the mirror and he thinks that he's a lion. I love it. And then number 3 is responsible decision making. So students making ethical and constructive choices about personal and social behavior. Number 4 is relationship skills. So forming positive relationships, working in teams, and dealing effectively with conflict. And then of course, number 5 is social awareness. So showing understanding and empathy for others. So talking about diversity and inclusion in the classroom, we're going to focus on 2 of these 5 components, and that is relationship skills and social awareness. So implementing culturally responsive instruction and putting an emphasis of inclusion in your classroom, students will be able to form positive relationships, work in teams, and be better at handling conflict and be more inclined to show understanding and empathy towards others. So inclusion and culturally responsive teaching. So we talked about ways to recognize diversity and maintain inclusion in the classroom. This was one of our big discussions. And the first one was to get to know your students. So I asked them how they get to know their students in class. The dance teacher said that she puts her kids into groups at the beginning of the year, and what they do is they find something similar that they all have in common in that group, and then they will share it to the class. I think that's a great way for kids to see, what all they have in common, how they can connect and develop friendships and be able to work together. The social studies teacher, what she does is for the first couple weeks of school, she'll, as she calls roll, she'll repeat the name of the student back just to get that memorized. and then she'll have them share one interesting fact about them. And then our business teacher, what she does is she creates a about me presentation assignment. And so basically these kids have the opportunity to make a presentation that's all about them, all about their background, and what they're interested in, what their hobbies are, about their family, and they get to present it in front of the class whatever way they want. So that is a pretty awesome little activity that they can do. And then our PE teacher, what he does is as he calls roll, he'll walk by and then he'll ask them questions and get to know them and get to know what they're interested in. So more on in a group setting, but more individual in that matter. So in the presentation, we basically talked about just taking the time to learn about each student's background, learning styles, and hobbies. Building those positive relationships will help those kids feel involved, and it builds trust, and they'll be able to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and opinions during future class discussions and everything like that. So the next one was to maintain consistent communication. So the question that was asked was, what are some ways to maintain that consistent communication? So I know a couple of them had mentioned, emails and Schoology and just discussions in the class. And then what they really emphasized, though, was talking about feedback. So I had asked them how they maintain consistent feedback, or how do they give their feedback to the students. And they explained that they do that in group settings during activities or on Schoology, and they also do it in one-on-one conversations, just to talk about progress and how they're doing in class and how they can improve. So it was a really awesome conversation that I had with them, and it sparked some ideas on what I could do in my class, and I hope that it sparked ideas in the other group members on how to maintain that consistent communication in class. So the next thing that we talked about in ways to recognize diversity and maintain inclusion is acknowledge and respect for every single student. So learn about their backgrounds, and then also, take time to learn about your backgrounds to find out what you have in common with them, what's different. And then a way you can do that as well is to allow students to give presentations about their own backgrounds. So like the business teacher did, the About Me presentations, that is a perfect example of how to do that. The next way to recognize diversity and maintain inclusion is practice cultural sensitivity. So take the time to learn each student's languages used, learning styles, etc. And then create learning experiences that are interactive and involve collaboration. So have them work together, maybe try and solve a problem. Next one is incorporate culture and diversity in lesson plan. So what I did is I asked them how they included diversity in their lesson plans, and it was interesting because they kind of looked at each other through Zoom and thought really hard, and they were like, that is a really tough question. And then especially in the PE and the dance classes, it can get difficult to include these things in there. I know one thing that the dance teacher had mentioned was since she teaches all different kinds of dances and goes back in history, she said that whenever she gets a chance for students to create their own dance and add their own twist to it, and maybe incorporate their culture in the type of dance that they're presenting to the class, she says that's probably the best way that I can include diversity in the lesson. So one specific way you can incorporate culture and diversity in lesson plans is bringing in diverse speakers to add to real-life context on the topics. This is easier in some classes than others, like CTE courses. You can probably find someone more readily available to come speak to your class. But if you do get the opportunity to get a guest speaker, I know that it is a great experience for the learners. Then the last thing we talked about was to give students freedom and flexibility. So this is basically just allowing students to read and present their own material and then acting as a facilitator during discussion. So extending on freedom and flexibility, we want to go from a teacher-led environment, so a traditional teaching, to more of a student-centered instruction or learning communities. So with traditional teaching, according to Educating Culturally Responsive Teachers, teachers typically present students with a body of information that they are expected to report back exactly as they learned it. In doing so, we present ourselves as the unquestioned recipients of course content and passive followers of classroom procedures that have been determined by mostly us. So this is basically saying that the teachers are the directors of the class. So I had a teacher in college, or a professor, that would come in. He wouldn't say a word. He'd sit on the desk. He'd put a recorder next to him, and he would just talk for an hour and a half. So even though there were 20 plus students, our learning experience was basically individual. So in this type of setting, learning is majority of the time individual, even though individual students have a class of 20 plus students. So for student-centered learning or learning communities, I found this resource on the internet, and it's basically a chart talking about the descriptions of a teacher that is more teacher-centered or teacher-led, and then a teacher that is more student-centered. So basically, when you're looking at a teacher that is more teacher-centered, they function as a task manager. They select roles and objectives, they engineer infrastructure, set quality and productivity goals, and they plan for performance improvement. And then when looking at a teacher that is more student-centered, you see them more as a facilitator. So they function as a resource, they stimulate learning, they guide learning activities, they assist discovery, and then they recognize areas of growth and need. So this is a great resource to look at and to see where you kind of fall in the quadrants, and then maybe what improvements you need to make to become more student-centered. In student-centered classrooms, students are engaged in purposeful activities that can invite different viewpoints. So I'm going to show you 2 activities that you can implement. If you already do these activities, that's great. You can help another teacher implement them in their class, or if you haven't done these are great resources to use and maybe implement into your classroom to become more of a student-centered class. So these 2 activities will allow students to pose problems and questions and that relate to the topic and explore the world outside of the classroom. So the first one is inquiry projects and action plans, and the second one is classroom dialogue. So this includes discussions, healthy debates, and then real conversations. So inquiry projects, what are they? So basically these are where students can develop questions based on a concern or an issue, and then they do the research, they collect data, and then they evaluate the data, and then they come up with a solution or an answer. And the cool thing is that you can broaden or deepen this learning by implementing action plans. So with action plans, basically a student would be researching an issue, and they would come up with a solution. And so they would develop an action plan based on that solution that they can implement into the real world. So next we are going to watch a video about inquiry-based learning. And it's less than 5 minutes, and it is a great resource that goes more into depth about it.
In The Order of the Phoenix, the fifth of the Harry Potter series, Dolores Umbridge takes over as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher and instantly transforms the classroom into this textbook-based, standardized, test-focused classroom. And Harry questions whether this will prepare them for fighting against Voldemort, he who must not be named, and that's when Umbridge punishes him. And he ends up forming his own school within a school called Dumbledore's Army. Now, Dumbledore's Army is purely inquiry-based. While Harry is the teacher, he is mostly the guide on the side, empowering students to ask questions and find the answers themselves. They rely on each other and on various spell books to solve problems and answer their questions. It is a space of experimentation. And while the process might seem messy compared to Umbridge's standardized approach, the students learn at a rapid pace because they aren't wasting their time repeating what they already know. This is an example of inquiry-based learning, although if it takes place in the UK, it's probably inquiry-based learning. I don't really know. Inquiry-based learning has existed for thousands of years. Both Socrates and Confucius used variations on their own inquiry-based format. It's a critical component to the scientific method of the early Enlightenment, and it was a core idea of both Dewey and Montessori's ideas around student-centered learning. Padaste shares a model of the 4 phases of inquiry. It starts with orientation, which is often a form of discussion. It's where they become aware of the key idea. And from there, it moves into conceptualization, where students generate questions and they define a hypothesis. This leads to an investigation phase, where students explore, experiment, and interpret data, often in a way that's flexible and dynamic. It can even seem kind of cyclical. And then finally, they move into a conclusion. Heather Banji and Randy Bell defined 4 different types of inquiry that you can view on sort of a spectrum from teacher-centered / structured into learner-centered / open. Level 1 is confirmation inquiry, where the teacher teaches the concepts, creates the questions, and models the process for students. They basically just kind of go along with it to learn about the process. Level 2 is structured inquiry, where the teacher creates the initial set of questions and kind of shares the procedures, but then the students walk through the rest of the inquiry process by collecting and analyzing the data and drawing their own conclusions. Level 3 is guided inquiry, and this is sort of the beginning of what we typically think of as inquiry. This is where the teacher provides the initial research question or questions, but students own the research process and the experimentation. And then level 4 is open inquiry or true inquiry. Here's where students formulate their own questions, design their experiments or their research, and collect their own data or facts that they then share in their findings. Here are a few places where you as a teacher can start with inquiry-based learning. In a language arts or social studies class, you can do a Wonder Day or Wonder Week project where students develop their own questions and move through the inquiry process on their own. You can also do a Genius Hour project where students not only ask their own questions, but design their own product as well. In math, you can have students explore a concept and develop their own problems, which is one of the things I love about the What Can You Do With This process of Dan Meyer. And in science, you could do something like a science fair project or a Mythbuster style approach to testing an urban legend. The key idea, though, is this. If we want students to own their learning, if we want them to remain curious, if we want classrooms to be bastions of curiosity and wonder, well, then we need to have something like inquiry-based learning in place so that they learn how to ask great questions, find the answers, and share their results with their peers.
So that video gave a little more insight about inquiry-based learning, but let's go ahead and move on to classroom dialogue. So a key component of a student-centered classroom that invites inclusion and different viewpoints is classroom dialogue. The goal of classroom dialogue is discovery and understanding. Dialogue values the voices of all participants and seeks to involve everyone in the community in discussing issues of common concern. It opens up students' beliefs, worldviews, and assumptions to critical inspection and simultaneously values multiple world views. So, like stated earlier, classroom dialogue can comprise of discussions, debates, and real conversations. So those conversations can be student to student, student to teacher, or outside of the classroom. So a recommendation before starting classroom dialogue is to have the class establish procedures for those activities, so more guidelines and rules. So educating culturally responsive teachers suggests 4 guidelines. Number 1 is to honor the confidentiality of the group and refrain from identifying specific individuals outside of the classroom. Number 2 is no put-downs allowed during discussions. Number 3 is to speak from your own experience and do not make generalizations. And number 4 is to address questions and comments to other classmates rather than the instructor. And then any other guidelines or rules can be added by the class as they see fit. So putting it all together, our diverse society is growing rapidly, and as educators we need to be able to prepare students for a continuously evolving world. In order to prepare students, educators need to be able to implement culturally responsive instruction in their classrooms. To invite inclusion and diverse viewpoints, we need to transition from a teacher-led instruction to more student-centered. Getting to know your students and learning more about them will create an environment of trust and inclusion, allowing class members to engage in open conversation, discussion, and debate. Students will feel safe and can share their experiences and opinions. They will participate in purposeful activities where students can take the lead in their learning. Through inquiry, projects, and classroom dialogue, students can research and discuss concerns, experiences, and deepen their understanding of the world around them. Through these activities, students will develop relationship skills and social awareness where they can show understanding and work through conflict respectfully. So since the audio didn't work on the original video, I had them do this activity, so I gave them a choice to work with a partner or share individually, but they had to pick either inquiry project or classroom dialogue to implement into their class. They chose the unit and topic that they would use, and then I wanted them to share why they chose their option, why they chose the unit and the topic, and then how it could bring diverse viewpoints and inclusion into their classroom. So overall, this discussion was pretty awesome, or this activity. I wish that the audio would have worked, but overall, they presented a lot of things that they already did do in the classroom. So, for example, our social studies teacher, what she does is she has her students, or she had her students during a topic in history, find an issue during an event, and then had the students get into groups and debate on how it was handled or how they could have done things differently. And she said it was an awesome experience to be able to hear the students go back and forth to use information that they have already learned, to use information that they retrieved from just doing research about the event. And then our business teacher, what she does in her classroom is she uses the inquiry-based learning approach, and she has students research some companies, find a conflict, or come up with a question, and then research and present their answers. So pretty straightforward with her. And then with dance, she what she does is there is a period where the students will be able to create their own dance. And so during that time, they get to work with their group, and they get to discuss which dance would be best, which all fits them better, how that dance can help them be successful in their project. So it was a lot about what they have had already done. But at the end of the conversation, I encourage them to take these activities and implement them into different aspects of their curriculum. So something different than what they've already done to enhance the learning, to create more real world experiences. And, I think they bought in and they had a good time. So throughout that professional learning, we discuss a little bit of social and emotional learning and how we can develop relationship skills and help students learn about social awareness through in diversity and inclusion in the classroom. The inquiry projects and action plans, along with classroom dialogue, is a great thing to implement into the classroom. To spark conversation, to get different viewpoints first, to allow learners to work with other students and connect with them and talk about their concerns, their experiences, and everything like that. So the next part of this video, I want to introduce it by a TED Talk that a young 9th grader talked about diversity in education. He brings about some good points, and after the video, we will expand a little more on those points and how we can continue to support professional learning and bring in inclusion and diversity in the classroom.
I am a 9th grade student at a high school in Wilmington, Delaware, one of America's poorest and most dangerous cities. And I'm here to tell you that my high school and many high schools like mine may not be fully preparing students for life after high school. But before you brace yourself for another cliche talk about the declining quality of American public education, you probably should know something very important. I actually attend a private school. And while my school, like many other private schools, gives me access to abundant resources, top-of-the-line facilities, amazing teachers, and a curriculum that will challenge and engage me, it masks something very important that me and all of my peers will need to be successful members of society: racial and socioeconomic diversity. Now, please, don't get me wrong. I am super fortunate to have received such a generous scholarship to one of the most prestigious private institutions Delaware has to offer. It provides me with opportunities many other kids in public schools where I live are never afforded. In their schools, classes are crammed and crowded. Teachers turn over at rates that create instability for students. Students have to worry about their safety as much as they worry about their studies. Expectations for students' learning and abilities are low. And many students graduate high school without the right tools to be successful in college. And yes, while I understand a private school education is a game changer for me and my peers, we're missing something very important. We're missing the fact that the system of segregated education that we've implemented is hurting all students, public and private. Let me give you a rundown of the typical diversity in my week. In my biology class, I am the only African American. In my math class, I am one of 2 African American males. And so far in high school, I have no teachers of color. Sometimes I sit in class and think, I am definitely not in Kansas anymore. But you know, I'm definitely not my previous public school either, where 98% of the student population were African American and 79% were low income. The multicultural world outside of school will easily be a culture shock for those students segregated by race and socioeconomic status. If you didn't notice, America is changing. Just a few years ago, for the first time in American history, more than half of all school children were considered low income. And by 2020, half of the nation's children are expected to be a part of minority race or ethnic group. And by 2060, researchers project that my tiny home state of Delaware will be one of the most diverse states in the nation. And if we stay on our current segregated path, we will occupy a future of racism, misunderstanding, division, tension, and disparity. In order to see change, we need to immerse ourselves in diverse experiences, like our school requires us to immerse ourselves in books. We need to learn about race relation and how to overcome division, like our school makes us learn about poetry or geometry. We're going to have to diversify our curriculum so it does not ignore the excellence and the impact of those not of European descent. All of us, we are going to have to prioritize diversity when we make decisions on where we want to live and go to school. Because ultimately, our schools are segregated because that's what our neighborhoods look like. During his famous I Have a Dream speech, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, 100 years later, the life of the Negro is sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. More than 50 years after Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech and the Brown versus Board of Education decision that found segregated schools to be unconstitutional, we are back at a place where our schools are segregated and unequal. Because as powerful as the courts are in this country, they cannot make our hearts and our minds just. We're going to have to want to create a different future and a more perfect union. So today, I have a dream that one day we will arrive at a future where segregated schools and neighborhoods will be a thing of the past. Thank you.
So that ninth grader brought up some really good points about diversity in education. So we're going to focus on that and then also supporting continuous professional development. So first, the points on TED Talk he made. Public education needs racial and economic diversity. Teacher turnover rates are high. Student expectations are low. Segregation of public school students by race and socioeconomic status. There is a lack of diversity in teachers. Now, that doesn't mean all teachers or all schools, but there are some schools that do lack in diversity. He did note that the world is evolving and changing, so becoming more diverse. Schools should have curriculum that is diverse, and then students should be able to immerse in diverse experiences. So continuing on with those points, Though this student is talking primarily about people of color, we do also need to consider religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, language background, and more. So, some things to consider. There is a lot that we cannot control. For example, like who lives in our community. But there are a lot of things we can control as administrators. So number one is who we hire. Number two is us implementing and being intentional about mentoring teachers and providing mentor programs at our schools. Teacher retention. So that has a lot to do with culture and the teachers feeling valued. Do they feel like they are a big part of your campus? Do they have opportunities to grow? Are they able to take leadership opportunities to grow and to help lead this campus in the mission and values that it holds? We can control supporting and implementing more diverse curriculum, and that just means building relationships with central administration and getting input from other teachers and working together and working collaboratively on trying to make the curriculum where students have opportunities to immerse themselves in the real world and get real world experiences. And then we can also control professional development that encourages inclusion and diversity, and that can be led by diverse staff members. And that also leads to staff members having an opportunity to grow and to share their experiences to maybe help another teacher in the experiences that they have had and what they can offer them during that professional development. So for who we hire, just going more in depth, administrators can be more intentional about hiring and recruiting qualified candidates who have a diverse background. So they can recruit from within, continue to grow paraprofessionals and diverse employees to become teachers. A lot of the paraprofessionals and support staff that are on campus live in the community. So there's really not better people to become teachers and be a part of the community and to help the students of that community learn and grow and have valuable experiences that will help them in the real world. This can also help employee retention. So paraprofessionals and support staff can continue to grow and take a step in their career to becoming a teacher. And then most importantly, employees want to feel valued and they want to grow. So providing the opportunities to grow, providing leadership opportunities, and just making their experience in their career worth value. And then talking about mentoring teachers. So be intentional about inclusion in the classroom and mentor the teachers who still need improvement in this area. I know that our campus, we had a mentor-mentee program for new hire teachers. And I was a part of that when I first got hired on, and it was a great experience. I got to learn from teachers who did have experience, and they gave a lot of advice and really set the tone for the culture that is on campus. Teacher retention, I know we've talked about that a little bit, but in order to really implement change, promote a culture of inclusion and diversity, you must have a staff that believes in your mission and values, and that they feel like they are valued and will grow in their profession and will continue the culture that you are laying out on your campus. This can be done by providing professional development and opportunities to grow, creating leadership opportunities, like I said before, and then giving a teachers a platform where they can take positive risks to improve their instruction and their students' success. Teachers have to grow in order to be better at their job, and the better that they are at their job, the better students are going to be in school, the more they're going to succeed, the more they're going to grow and learn. And then supporting and implementing a more diverse curriculum. So again, just work with central admin on creating a more diverse curriculum, receive the input from teachers, and use the summer to reevaluate the current curriculum to make it better. And really taking in the ideas of teachers that share that with you. And then professional development. I think this is huge with any professional development. Be intentional in incorporating an inclusive and diverse classroom environment. So with that, having students participate in real conversations, solving problems with their peers, working with maybe other students from other classes, having teachers work together to collaborate and combine their content areas for a project or something like that, but giving students the opportunity to work with other students, not just in their classroom, but outside the classroom, and getting those real world experiences. And then professional development can also give leadership opportunities to diverse teachers to create and lead a professional development. I mean, other teachers can learn from other teachers. So, from their experiences and their knowledge and what they know. So having an opportunity for teachers to do this is huge and can lead to success. And then most importantly, make sure that teachers leave a professional development with something tangible that they can take with them to implement into their instruction. I have been a part of good professional development, and I've been a part of bad professional development. And what I've noticed is every good PD experience that I have had, I always leave with something that I can implement into my class, into my instruction, into the management of my class, or even into coaching, since I am a coach. So that is super, super important. And then just to sum it up, there are a lot of things that we cannot control outside of our campus, but there are things that we can control to create a more inclusive environment in the classroom. Through the implementation of professional development that is intentional about inclusion and diversity, we can take one step forward to giving students the resources and the opportunity to be successful in the future.